Okay, we'll get started. And so on Monday, we had introduced kind of object-oriented programming in Python, and we said, you know, we can define our own classes. Okay, we can define our own classes of objects, and when we do this, we can specify different attributes. You know, so for example, here we're going to create a class called time. So let me just back up maybe a slide or two. Okay. So I think we said, all right, here's a method, or not a method. Here's a function that we can use to add times together. And on Monday, the first kind of function that we created was we're going to add the hours together, add the minutes together, add the seconds together, and if any of those things are over 60, you know, we're going to do some modular division, and then recalculate what the new hours and new minutes and new seconds are. And we said, you know what? Another approach to this concept of combining and adding time together is, you know what if instead of representing time the way we normally do and say, you know, right now it's 9:05 a.m., what if we just said, hey, how many seconds have passed since midnight, okay? And then we'd say, okay, well, since midnight today, you know, it's been, I don't know, 9 times 3,600, so whatever that number is, okay, plus, you know, 5 minutes or 6 minutes times 60, and so on and so forth. So we're going to say, all right, take the time, multiply it by 60 to get the number of minutes. Take the hours, multiply it by 60 to get the number of minutes. Take the number of minutes, multiply it by 60 to get the number of seconds. And then to kind of convert back and say, you know, instead of saying it's been 7,200 seconds since midnight, we'll just say it's 2 a.m. Okay, and to do that, we'll convert from integer time back into from the number of seconds back into a time. And so we can do this. So here's 9:45. All right, so this is our object. We've just defined some, again, our time class definition is empty right now, and we're just manually assigning attributes. We're saying time.hour, time.minute, time.second. Okay, test time, I guess, test time.hour, and we're saying it's 9:45. We're going to convert it into the number of seconds, which would be 35,100 seconds is 9 hours and 45 minutes. And then I can take that number 35,100 and print it back into 9:45. And so we left that off, and we said, okay, you know what? Now we can take 2 times and add them together. What we're going to do is we convert both of those times into the number of seconds. We add those number of seconds together, which we can add very easily in a very straightforward way. None of this, how much over 60 is it? None of that modular division nonsense. And then once we have that, we can convert it back into a time. Okay? So this is kind of where we've left off, and we're going to pick up from there and say, you know what, let's put this kind of thinking and these kinds of ideas into a class definition, So, okay, so now we're going to redefine our class time. Okay, so here I'm declaring class time. So this is inside my Jupyter notebook. I've declared time once again. So this is a new definition of class time. Right now, there's nothing in this definition. I just have the doc string that effectively does nothing. It only gives me an answer when I say, you know, what is class time? And right now we have this method, or not this method. Right now it's a function, and I apologize. I'm still using kind of the old notation. I think in one of the lectures I said, you know, we use the curly braces and we do dot format, and it fills in those spots. This is kind of the older style. It still works, where instead of curly braces, we had kind of percentage signs, and you can kind of fill in these things. But basically, just imagine kind of curly braces wherever you see a percentage sign along with you know, the format string, and so these things are going to get inserted into all of these things, and so this is how it gets printed out. Okay, so right now, as it stands, is we have the function, we call the function on the object time, and it prints out. So we define our object, we set attributes hours, minutes, seconds, and we call the function on it. And this is how it's been working so far. And what we want to do is we want to go from this function that we've defined into a method, and we're going to put this method inside the class definition. So here, now that I'm calling class again, I'm defining a new class of time. Okay, so this definition is going to overwrite this older definition in cell 80. This is now a new definition of the time object, and within the time object, I basically just copied and pasted that what do you call it? That function name, and I've put it inside the class definition. Okay, so just to go from here, all I'm doing is I basically just copied and pasted this function definition, and I'm putting it inside the class definition. Okay, and in order to make it part of the class definition, I just indent it. Okay, and so now that I've indented it, Python recognizes and says, okay, this is part of the class definition. Just like you would write, any kind of function or loop or any kind of chunk of code, we do it with indentation. Okay. All right. So we've redefined the class with a method inside, and so now we can call this method. All right. And so if I want to use this, I have to recreate kind of our object start. Because whenever you define a new definition of some class time, it doesn't like magically redefine the old things, right? My analogy is kind of like when you buy a Honda Civic in 2017, and then they release a new model, a new version of the car, a couple of years later, or I guess every year they make little updates. It's not like your old car suddenly gets updated to the new car. That would be awesome, but that doesn't happen. If you want the new version, you have to kind of buy the new version. And so here, we've redefined the class time. It doesn't go back and change all of the old stuff, so we have to redefine our object start. And again, here I'm doing start.hour, start.minute, start.second. Okay? And then when we call the method, okay? So there's one way is you can call the method using the class definition dot the method name. So I can do capital T time, because that's the class definition time, right? I can do capital T time dot print time and then put in the object start. Okay, and that's going to work. Okay. Almost no one uses it this way. Okay, it's a valid way, but more likely you're going to call start.print time, okay, start.print time, and then it calls the function print time, which is right here, and it works. Okay, so this is probably how we're going to call it. So you take the object that we've defined, which is currently start. So again, start is an instance, is an instance of this time class object. And from there, we call the method, which we said start.printtime. And that's it, okay? So when you call the method from the object itself, the object is known as the subject of the method, and the subject will get passed into the method as its first argument. So in this example, start will get passed as the first argument in the method print time. So notice print time, when I'm calling it, the parentheses are blank, right? And inside our class definition, we said print time accepts an object of whatever. We're calling it time, just the alias for the object being passed to it is called time. And then it's going to look for time hour, time.hour, time.minute, time.second. And so even though print time is expecting an object in it, whenever you're calling it from inside an object, this object start will get passed into as the first argument of the method. Okay, so even though I don't have anything there, it's getting called, it's getting executed, and so now this is getting printed out. when we do this by convention, so the way I've defined it, this works just fine. This works just fine, okay? But by convention, when we define our methods, the argument that will get passed in as itself, as the first argument, we call self, to kind of say this is the, within this object itself, okay? Within this object itself, we're gonna look for these things that are part of it itself, okay? So the idea is when you are kind of calling this thing, you're calling print time on itself, okay? On the start object itself. And so if we're gonna follow the convention, we'd write our time class this way, okay? We would do class time, and we're gonna do define a method, okay? Define a function, print time inside self, okay? That uses self as the object, and it's gonna do this. Self.hour, self.minute, self.second. And this is how it's gonna work, okay? We could create define another method called time to integer, and we would pass itself as an object here. And we would take self.hour, multiply it by 60, plus self.minute, take the number of minutes, multiply it by 60, add the number of seconds, and we would return the number of seconds. Okay. So, because it might be useful to kind of take the time and convert it to a number of seconds. All right, is this okay? This idea of using self, right? So, and anytime you're reading some Python code, you're frequently going to be seeing this word self inside class definitions. Okay, so here again, we got to redefine our object using the new definition of this class. So I got start.hour, start.minute, start.second, 9:45. And then I do start.printtime, and it comes out as 9:45. I can do start.time to integer, and it comes out 35,100. And so far, so good. All right. What this will do, okay, we're going to add the following function. Okay, it's going to convert the number of seconds into a time. Now, we can't make it a method of the time object because the argument of this function is an integer value of seconds, and there's no object to invoke the method on, right? So we have this function, integer to time, and what it accepts is the number of seconds, and it converts it back. It converts it back into time, okay, a time object. But so if you think about what the time object represents, okay, within the time object we've got the number of hours, the number of minutes, the number of seconds, and a way to kind of print that out. But it doesn't make sense to put this method inside the class definition of time, because if we were to say invoke this thing on itself, well, it's already a time object. So why would we convert the number of seconds into a time object here? Okay, so here we're just going to say pass some number of seconds, say 35,100, and convert it into a time. And so we're going to create a new object called time, and we will do modular division to get the number, to get minutes and seconds, and then we'll modular division on the minutes and assign that to time hour and time.minute. Okay, and this is all using kind of Python's tuple unpacking to assign it to our values here. Okay, so let's continue expanding our definition of this class. Before I forget, let me go ahead and give you your first view quiz answer. Today's first view quiz answer is D. D as in dog. D as in dog is our first view quiz answer. All right, so I've got print time, time to int, and increment. All right, so how do I do increment here? Okay, so we take our time. We've got self hour, self minute, self seconds. We're going to print that out. We're going to do time to integers. And then if we want to say take our time and we're going to increment it by some number of seconds, okay? So we're going to say take the time object, and we want to basically increment our current time by some number of seconds. So what we will do is we'll take this number of seconds and add, we're going to convert the self, okay? The time that's stored in itself to integer, okay? So it's going to call self.time to int. It's going to convert it to number of seconds, and now I can add those two things together. And then what I want to return is I want to return a time, okay? And so we're going to call the function. This function is not defined inside the class definition. We're assuming that this function exists inside our global space, okay? Inside the kind of the top level main. So we're assuming this thing exists, and we're going to take this total number of seconds that we've incremented by, and we're going to convert it back into a time object. Yeah, question?
Sorry, why do you use self for every first argument? Like, I know it's convention, but isn't that kind of confusing if you're writing a bunch of different methods?
Right. Yeah. So, well, that's so when you invoke a method from an object, what Python is going to do is it's always going to pass the object itself as the first argument of that method. So it's always kind of like, so before we would call, we had the time object, and we would call print time, and we would put in that object time, right? The start or duration or whatever it was, okay? And now what we want to do is we want to be able to call, start.printtime or duration.printtime, whatever these things are. And so when we invoke the method from within an object, it's always going to pass the object in as its first argument. And just by convention, we call it self, call that thing self. You could use any other name. You could call print time, or print time, I don't know, something else here. I can't think of anything else because I'm always used to seeing it as self. But that's that's what we do. And so that's just the kind of the way Python has been structured, is that when you do object-oriented programming and you call a method from within the object itself gets passed in as the first argument of that function. Yeah.
So you can define, like for a method inside an object, you can use functions from outside that you define.
Yes. So yeah, within and people might have different opinions, but yeah, here we are invoking a function call called int to time, and this is not defined inside our method. And so if we were to give this, store this code someplace and give it to a friend to run on their computer, we need to make sure that part of that code we're giving also includes this definition int to time. Okay? I mean, technically, this function the star is a function, right? It's a multiplication function, and we didn't define what multiplication is inside this thing. We're just assuming that this exists inside, and of course this function exists. But there's a whole bunch of other things, right? Like print and all of these other kind of functions that we take for granted as part of existing within Python, and it's always going to kind of find those things. And yes, you can call functions that don't necessarily haven't been defined within the class definition. Okay, which is what we're going to do. So again, because we've redefined the class, we have to redefine our object using the new class definition. And we've got start.hour, start.minute, start.second. Okay, and I can do start.printtime, 9:45. And we're going to do start.increment, and we're going to increment by 1,337. Okay, that's I don't know how much time that is. Okay, it's like 20 something minutes, 22 minutes and 17 seconds, I guess. Okay, and so we're going to do end. End will be a time class object, because int to time, if we go back a couple slides, this will return an object, it returns whatever time is, which is defined as a time class object. Okay, so it does that, and so because it's a time class object, I can do end.print time. Okay, and I can also call any of these things. What is end.hour? What is end.minute? What is end.second? And it would return all of these things. Okay, so far okay? So here we say, keep in mind that when you call a method from an object, the object itself is always passed as the first argument of the method. So here, you know, what if I wanted to increment, I don't know, like take these two things, right? So I do start.increment, and I'm doing 1337, 460, and then I get this error, okay? It says increment takes 2 positional arguments, but 3 were given, okay? And you know, you look at increment, it says our definition here, you know, the function takes two arguments, and when we called it, it looks like we're only passing it 2 arguments, but again, the self is always passed in as the first argument. So even though it's not explicitly written here, it's getting 3 arguments. Self, 1337, 460, and it says, I don't know what to do. You've given me 3 things. Self, 1337, 460. And so it complains, right? It returns an argument. So even though we only see 2 arguments in the parentheses, the self is always the first argument, so there are 3 arguments being passed. And that's just how object-oriented stuff works in Python. The self always gets passed in as the first argument. And if you don't want to use it, that's fine, but you just have to assume that self is being passed. Okay, so there's other things we can do, right? So one thing is we can take, we can create a method called isAfter, and this is going to return basically a Boolean value, okay? If it's before or after another object, okay? So it's going to take in 2 time class objects, compare them, and we're going to add this to our class definition. All right. So because we expect the argument passed to isTime to be is another time class object, we can invoke the methods of the other object. Okay. So by convention, the first parameters of the method, is the method self. And if you are passing another object, you can call it other, okay? So we are defining a function called isAfter, a method inside our time class definition, and it's going to be self, and the other argument will be other, okay? And again, when we call it, we're only going to be passing the other, okay? Because it's going to be kind of like start.isAfter end, or maybe it'll be end.isAfter start, or whatever, right? So we got these 2 time class objects, one we'll call start, one we'll call end, and we want to say, hey, is one thing greater than the other? So how can we compare 2 times? Okay, how can we compare 2 times? Well, we say, so one way you could think is like, is the hour bigger than the other hour? Okay, and if those are tied, is the minute bigger than the other minute? And if those are tied, is the second greater than the other second? Now, because we have this thing where we said, hey, you know what, we're going to convert the time into just the number of seconds after midnight, all we have to do is we just invoke the method time to int. And so if it's 9:45, this will return, you know, 35,100 seconds after midnight. And then whatever other time it is, it'll say it's this many seconds after midnight. And all we have to do is we just do this comparison. Is the self greater than the other? Okay, then that means the self is after true than the other, right? Is self after other, that will return true. So this is just going to return a Boolean value, true or false, whether the self value is greater than the other value. Okay, does this feel okay? So when we call this, again, just like everything else, we redefine our object using the new time. So we call start, it's 9:45. End, we increment this, and end is 10:07:17. And then we can ask, is the end End is after start, that comes back as true. Start is after end, that comes back false. Okay, and again, these things, we're just using the kind of the methods here. Okay, and notice the way we name these methods. Okay, it's recommended and kind of convention is if your function is going to return a Boolean value, true or false, the function name should be something that is kind of like a yes or no question, right? Start is after, right? Rather than start dot after end, which is a little bit ambiguous. Start dot after, like what dot after is not a verb, okay? It's not a verb. And so when you think about functions, functions are basically verbs that objects can do, right? Methods are verbs, functions are verbs. These are things that these things can do, and so you want to kind of use a name that sounds like a verb. Now again, you can name your functions whatever you want. All you have to do is follow the rules, and they just have to start with a letter or whatever, and you can have all sorts of things. But to make your code easier to read, give it names that kind of make sense. And so here, things that return true or false, we want to turn them into kind of yes or no questions. Start is after end? No. End is after start? Yes. So we can do that. So is after returns a Boolean value, true or false, and that's what we have here. Okay. All right. So let's. I'm going to introduce some of these methods that are kind of, when you define classes within Python, we actually expect certain methods, and one of these is the init method, the initialize method, right? Every time I redefine the class, I have to do start.hour, start.minute, start.second, and I've been doing it, right? Now, because I already pre-written all of my code in these slides, we haven't had to face the annoyance of typing in start.hour equals 9, start.minute equals 45. It's already been done every single time. But if you were working this yourself, you'd find it quite annoying to have to do. And so there is a special method, the initialization method, which we call double under init. Okay, double under. So anytime you see these two underscores, it's a double under method. Maybe we call it a dunder method sometimes. And this method, if it has been defined inside your class definition, this is going to get invoked anytime you create a new object. Anytime you create a new object of this class, this double under init method will get invoked. And so usually part of this function will be basically all of the attributes that are going to get formed and assigned within the class. Okay? And so the parameters of init should have the same names of the attributes to avoid any confusion. So my class definition keeps getting bigger and bigger, but that's okay. I think hopefully we're able to follow all along all of these steps, right? If I just showed you this on the first step, it would be a little overwhelming. But here I'm just adding this thing. And so now this method, double under init, this will get invoked anytime I create a new time class object. I do time parentheses, and what it's expecting is it's expecting 3 additional arguments to be passed. The number of hours, the number of minutes, and the number of seconds. By default, those things are going to be 0, 0, 0, but I can specify them separated by commas, and all it's going to do is it's going to take whatever hour, set it to self.hour. Take the number of minutes to set it to self.minutes. Take the number of seconds and do self.seconds. Okay? And again, self is always the first argument. And I don't actually use, I'm assigning them to self, right? Self.hour, self.minute, self.second. So we're taking these things and those are getting assigned into itself here. Okay, so now that I've defined the class definition this way, this is how I would create a new object, right? So we would say midnight would just be default time, and everything is just going to be 0, 0, 0. And so I could do midnight.print time, and I get 0, 0, 0. If we wanted to do a new time, I could say 9. And in our class definition, the first value is going to be the number of hours, the next will be the number of minutes, the next will be the number of seconds. So here I can do 9, and I get, when I call print, I get 9 o'clock. Now I can get to pass in for hour. And here I can do 9, 45, and this will create a time, 9:45. And so this, whenever you call capital T time with the class definition as if we're creating a new object of this thing, it's going to create the object, and it's going to use the double under init, right? So this function that I've defined, it's going to call that, and it's going to take whatever arguments have been passed in there and assign it to itself. So now I don't have to go back and repeatedly have to do start.hour, start.minute every single time. So now when I create a new thing, it works. Okay, so that's great. How many of you presented answers? Just one so far? Okay, I'll give you your second one. Your second one today is C. C as in cat. C as in cat. Okay, so what we've been doing, every time we wanted to see this, we've been calling new time.print time or midnight.print time or whatever it is, .print time. Okay, we've been printing it out. There is another special method, the double under string method, double under str. And what this does is anytime you call print on an object, Python invokes the double under string method. So when you say print a list, well, I guess within the list definition there would be like a double under string method, and it says, hey, put in a square bracket over here, give out all of the values in the thing, and separate them with commas and stuff like that, right? Anytime you call print on something, it invokes the double under string method. So far, what we've been using is we've been using print underscore time, which is a function that we've defined inside the class. And all we're going to do is basically I'm just going to rename this thing to be double under string. And when I rename this function print underscore time into double under string, this is going to get invoked anytime we call print, right? And so we are not going to call print, but we're going to use return to return a string of that object, okay? So notice all of these things, because I've been calling print time, and inside our print, inside our class definition, print has always kind of printed out. And in Python, when you call print, the return is nothing, right? It returns nothing here. The error is none. But now what we're going to do is I've basically renamed that print method into double under string self. And this is going to be the string representation of itself. And what it's going to do is it's going to return the string representation of itself. Basically, the hours, the minutes, and the seconds kind of going into these placeholders separated by colons, and it's going to return this. Okay, so it's returning a string where it's basically done a dot format and it filled in all of these values here. Okay, so here is new time. We're creating a new object of time with values 9:45. And now I call print new time, and it prints out 9:45. Okay, and technically, I think I can just, if I do a new underscore time, it will just return the itself as a string, right? So anytime you call print on the object, it's going to invoke the double under string. So rather than having to do new time dot print time or something, I can just call print on this object new time, and it prints it out here. So that's these double under methods. Okay, so the double under methods really, I think in my opinion, makes Python a very elegant language for object-oriented things. Okay, So this stuff is really cool. Okay, we can do what's known as operator overloading. Okay, so there's even more double under methods, and so there's another double under method, which is going to be double under add. Okay, double under add. This method gets invoked anytime Python sees a plus. Okay, anytime there's a plus, Python's going to invoke double under add. Okay, and the way it works is when you use plus, you have something in front of the plus and something after the plus. So the thing in front will be the self, the thing in after will be the other. Okay, so when you do like 10 plus 5, that's going to be basically the double under add. Self is 10, other is 5. Add those two together. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to use the add operator for 2 times. Okay, so what if I have 9:45 plus an hour and 10 minutes? Okay, or something like that. Okay, what we will do is we're going to add this definition inside our class definition. So we got self, we have other, and then how do we combine things? Okay, well, we're going to just convert everything into seconds. We'll add the number of seconds together, and then we'll take that numbers of seconds and then convert it back into a time. So we will say self.time to integers, other.time to integers. We're going to add those two together into, oh, I'm sorry, this should just be equals, not a plus equals. All right, so that's a typo here. Okay, this should just be equals. Self.time to integers, other.time to integers. Add those two together. This should just be equals, no plus. And then we're going to take the number of seconds and convert it back into time. So so here it is, right here. I have it correct here, just an equal sign, no plus equals. So we're defining add as self.time plus other.time, and we'll add those two together, and we're going to return this. So just so we got double under add. So here I've got time 9:45, duration 1:35, and we're going to say do start plus duration, and it does exactly what we want it to do. 9:45 plus 1:35. This we end up with 11:20. Okay, and now we can it gets invoked anytime we use the plus, right? Which is cool, right? That's cool that we can do this. So if we can further make this complicated, okay? So we've got something called type-based dispatch, okay? And so if you see the plus operator, we can have a function, or we can have Python look at the thing, check, are you incrementing by a number of seconds, or is it a time object? And if it's a time object, treat them as time objects and add them together. If it's the number of seconds, we have a function, right? We have increment by some number of seconds. And we can have it invoke these things depending on what kind of object is being passed. So we're going to modify our double under add method, and we got self and we have other. So it's going to be self plus the other thing, and the other thing, we're going to say if the other is an instance of time. So we got is instance other time. So if the other object is a time-based object, we're going to call self.addTime. And if the other is not an instance of time, we're going to have to assume that it's a number of seconds. We're going to call the increment function, right? Self.seconds, we convert self.time to integers, add that to seconds, and then we'll convert that back into time. Okay, so we're going to modify our double under add method to this, and it's going to invoke whether it's the add time or increments here. Okay, so that goes in under here. We've got if is instance other time, and then depending on that, it's either going to do add time our increment. So our class definition is getting longer and longer and longer, but I hope we're still okay at understanding everything, all of these different pieces together. Okay, so here I've got 945. I've got duration, which is a time class object. So if I do start plus duration, we get 1120. Here, if I do start plus 1337, it invokes the other method, the increment, and it returns 100717. Okay, and the whole point of this is to make, once you have your classes defined, is to make using them easy, right? Now, if, like, I don't have to do any of this stuff, right? Like, you can ask, like, why do you have to do all of this? You don't have to. You don't have to do any of this, okay? But you want to make your objects usable in kind of this user-friendly, intuitive way, right? You don't want to have to force the users to have to remember, oh, this I'm adding seconds, so I've got to invoke this method. This I'm adding a time, so I'm going to invoke this method, right? If you can just say, hey, you're combining things, let's, you just do the addition sign, and it works, great, okay? We can do that. And that makes it easier, right? And if your users had to go, oh, this is, if this threw an error and you have to say, oh yeah, I got to convert this into something, it can be a little bit frustrating. So, so having something like this makes it easier at the end of the day to kind of use all of this stuff. But again, you don't have to. You don't have to do this, but it's just nice. Okay. Now, okay. So addition in math is commutative, right? You could do 3 plus 6, and it's the same thing as 6 plus 3. The order in which you pass these arguments doesn't matter. Now, what happens here? If I do 1337 plus start, okay, so back here I did start plus 1337, that worked. But over here, if I do 1337 plus start, this breaks, okay? And that's because Python sees this, the 1337, it's an integer, and then I'm passing it a time object, 945, and Python says, well, this is an integer and this is a time, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, okay? And that's because what we have is we have our our increment function, which gets invoked anytime it sees, if it's time plus 1337, it's going to invoke increment. Increment is self and second, so self is the first argument, and 1337 is the number of seconds. That gets invoked, and this is what we call left-hand addition. The method is part of start, and then we can add 1337. What we have here is we can do what's called right-hand side addition, okay? And so this is double under rad, but it's right-hand addition, okay? And so we got right side addition, and we have this, okay? So we got self comma other, and when it's self comma other, the self comes after the addition sign, and the other is before, okay? So right-hand addition, self is on the right side, the other is on the left side. So normally we read left to right, but with right addition, self is on the right side, other is on the left side. And so we do, so if we see right-hand addition, all we're going to do is we're just going to invoke the left-hand addition doing self dot double under add other, okay? And so we'll do it like that. And now this will work. So here is our class definition, long as ever. We've got an add, we've got a right-hand add, we've got all of this stuff. And so now I can do 945 plus 135, that works fine. I can do start plus 1337, and that works. And I can do 1337 plus start, and that also works. All right, and this is, that's what we've got, okay? All of this, so because I've defined this plus thing, I can now invoke functions like sum, okay? Sum is a polymorphic function, and basically at its core, if it doesn't, if there's not something already defined, it's going to just say, hey, is there an add operator, right? When we use double under add, we gave it implicit support for the sum function, which is really cool, okay? Because my class definition now has double under add, okay? Now I can use a function like sum. I never defined how should sum operate with time objects, but because I've created the double under add, this is now going to work, okay? So I can do total, and we're going to do sum t1, t2, t3, and it's going to say, oh, you know what? Let's say if we can do time 1 plus time 2 plus time 3, and is that going to work? And it does, and so it just prints that out, okay? So you hour 20 plus an hour 40 plus an hour 30, that's going to add up to 4 hours and 30 minutes, and that works, right? When I discovered Python, I thought this was the coolest thing. All right, you guys should be like in awe, but that's all right. Okay. Third view quiz answer today is B. B as in bear. B as in bear. Okay, and technically, it is allowed. It's not going to throw errors right off the bat if you do this, okay? But it's recommended if you're going to define a class, all of the attributes that you will use should be created during the init process, right? So earlier on, we said, create a time thing, and then we did time, start.hour, start.minute, start.seconds. That's allowed. You can do it that way. But it's recommended to come up with some definition and invoke all of those attributes right off the bat. Okay, that's it for today. We will end here. Have a good rest of your day. I've just posted homework 4, and I apologize for the delay on that. That's going to cover pandas stuff, which I know we covered last week, but hopefully that will give you some good practice with pandas. Okay, we'll see you guys on Friday.